I kept telling myself that taking one more delivery wouldn't change anything. Yet, as I stood behind the counter staring at the slip in my hand, I felt the same heaviness settle in my chest that had haunted me for years, a weight born from exhaustion, loneliness, and the constant pressure of raising a child alone while pretending that I wasn't breaking a little more every day. Most nights at the pizza shop passed in a blur of orders and noise. But this one felt different the moment it appeared on the screen. Not because of the number of pizzas or the strange instructions written in sharp, hurried handwriting, but because late-night deliveries usually came from tired office workers or college kids. Not from a place like that. A mansion so far from town that most people only mentioned it when exchanging rumors about money, power, and the kind of people who didn't like being bothered. I glanced at the clock and considered turning the order down. I had already worked a double shift, and my legs pulsed with a dull ache that reminded me of the hours I had spent on my feet. But when the manager pointed out the tip amount, a tip so large it felt almost unreal, I realized I didn't have the luxury to refuse it, not when every dollar counted, not when my son's school kept sending reminders of unpaid fees, and not when every night I lay awake thinking whether I was doing enough, earning enough, being enough. Life hadn't been kind since my wife disappeared 3 years ago, leaving me alone with a toddler, a hollow explanation, and a broken heart that I still carried like a wound that refused to heal, no matter how much time had passed or how hard I tried to bury the memories. As I loaded the pizzas into the carrier, I caught my reflection in the stainless steel surface of the warmer. Unshaven, drained, eyes that carried too many years of sorrow for a man my age. And for a moment, I imagined my wife standing behind me the way she used to, brushing a hand along my shoulder and telling me that I looked tired and should take a break. A memory so vivid it stopped my breath, because there were nights when I genuinely believed I could feel her beside me, as if she were reaching out from wherever she had gone, trying to return but unable to cross the distance that separated us. I shook the thought away, locked the carrier, and told myself to focus, because drifting into old memories only made the present feel heavier. The road to the mansion wound through dark, quiet stretches of countryside, where the streetlights faded out one by one, until only the headlights carved a narrow path through the night. I kept thinking about the address, why someone in a place that grand would order takeout food, why they would request no phone calls or texts upon arrival, why the instructions insisted I leave the car running and approach the door alone. The more I drove, the more the past rose inside me in slow, suffocating waves. Because something about the route felt oddly familiar, as if I had traveled it long ago, maybe before my life shattered, maybe before the person I loved most vanished without warning, leaving behind a series of questions that time never answered. By the time the mansion emerged through the trees, I felt an uneasiness gather in my chest. Not fear, exactly, but a strange combination of curiosity and dread that made my heartbeat quicken. The mansion stood on a hill like a silent monument, its windows glowing faintly behind tall, ancient-looking columns. And while I had never been here before, the structure tugged at something deep inside me, a distant memory that refused to form clearly, like a dream slipping through my fingers the moment I tried to hold on to it. I parked the car in the long, circular driveway, every instinct urging me to turn around and leave. Yet the thought of that enormous tip and my son asleep at home forced me to push forward, because desperate fathers don't walk away from money they need, even when everything in them whispers that something is wrong. I stepped out with the pizzas, inhaling the cold night air, and the silence struck me harder than I expected. The kind of silence that didn't feel natural but intentional, as if the house itself demanded it. The tall wooden door towered above me, its carvings intricate and old, and although I had never been here, I felt an inexplicable sensation that made my skin tighten, a sense that I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't understand. I raised my hand and knocked, listening to the echo disappear deep into the mansion, waiting for footsteps, voices, movement, anything. But the stillness remained unbroken. Seconds passed, then a minute, then another, and I started to wonder if this was some kind of prank, though the size of the tip still lingered in my thoughts like a promise I couldn't ignore. I considered knocking again, but before my knuckles touched the wood, a faint sound drifted from the other side of the door. A soft murmur at first, then clearer. A woman's voice, gentle yet trembling, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The moment I heard her, my breath caught in my throat, because the tone, the cadence, even the faint tremor in it felt frighteningly familiar. So familiar that my hands began to shake as the pizzas wobbled in my grip. I leaned closer, convinced I was imagining things. Yet the voice rose again, unmistakably clearer this time, and in an instant my heart dropped, my knees weakened, and the world around me blurred, because the voice calling from behind the door didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to my wife. The moment the woman's voice slipped through the heavy wooden door, something inside me shifted so sharply that I had to force myself to breathe, because the familiarity of it wasn't subtle or vague. No, it struck with the precision of a memory I had spent years trying to bury. I stood frozen, the pizzas weighing down my arms, the cold air sinking into my skin as I tried to convince myself I hadn't heard what I knew I had heard. But before I could call out or reach for the door, the voice faded into an uneasy silence, and that silence wrapped itself around me with a discomfort that felt almost deliberate, like the house itself wanted me to stay quiet. I stepped back and looked up at the mansion fully, realizing just how enormous it truly was. The building stretched out in both directions with tall arches, high windows, and stone columns that looked as though they had belonged to another era. There were no guards outside, no workers, no staff, not even a dog barking in the distance, only a stillness so absolute it made the air feel heavy. The entire place radiated a presence that felt both grand and abandoned, like the kind of estate people inherit but never live in, the kind people whisper about because they don't know the truth and are terrified that one day they might. As I stood there, gripping the pizza carrier like it was the only real thing beneath my hands, old conversations drifted back into my mind. Warnings from locals, bits of gossip I never paid attention to, stories about the reclusive owner of the mansion who rarely spoke to anyone, stories about wealth hidden behind thick walls and secrets that never saw sunlight. I remembered a regular customer at the shop who once said no delivery driver ever made it past the mansion's gate because orders were canceled before anyone had the chance to show up. Another coworker joked that if anyone ever knocked on that door, they wouldn't return the same person. At the time, I brushed it off as exaggerated town talk, the kind of tales bored people tell to make their nights more interesting. But standing here now, those warnings replayed in my mind with a clarity I didn't appreciate earlier, because they didn't feel like harmless myths anymore. They felt like signs I should have paid attention to. I turned toward the driveway, briefly considering getting back into my car and leaving, pretending the order never existed. My instincts urged me to go, and for a moment I imagined driving home to my son, walking into our small apartment, and pretending this night had been just another ordinary shift. But the memory of the voice, her voice, held me in place with a grip far stronger than fear. It didn't matter how impossible it seemed, or how foolish I sounded even to myself. Something deep inside whispered that walking away now meant closing the door on answers I'd been searching for since the day my wife vanished. Still, doubt clawed at me. What if it wasn't her? What if exhaustion was playing tricks on me? What if I was letting hope blind me the way it had so many times before? I tried convincing myself that grief had a strange way of resurfacing when least expected, that sometimes the mind reached for the familiar, even when reality offered none. But as I turned and looked again at the carved wooden door, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore, a pull that came not from curiosity but from something deeper, something I didn't have a name for yet. My gaze drifted upward to the intricate carvings lining the arch above the door, patterns of vines and symbols that stirred a memory I couldn't fully grasp. I stepped closer, studying them, and suddenly it hit me with such force that my breath faltered. Years ago, before my wife disappeared, we had taken a weekend trip to visit a historic estate with similar patterns etched above its entrance. She had stood beneath them, laughing at something I said, running her fingers along the designs as though she could read the stories carved into the stone. The resemblance was uncanny, and that familiarity, that echo of a moment I thought I had lost forever, sent a shiver down my spine. It felt impossible, but I couldn't shake the certainty that there was a connection between that memory and this mansion. Something about this place reached backward into my past in ways I didn't understand yet. I swallowed hard and knocked again, this time not with hesitation but with determination that surprised even me. The knock traveled into the depths of the mansion, faint but steady. I waited, listening closely, listening the way a person listens for the thing that matters most. For a long moment there was nothing. The silence thickened, the night settled deeper, and I started to wonder if the voice had been a dream, if my mind had pulled a cruel trick on me. I prepared to step away, unable to bear the disappointment simmering in my chest. Then I heard it, the same voice as before, faint yet unmistakably real, speaking the exact phrase my wife used to say every time I came home late from work. "Just a minute, I'm coming." My hands went numb. No one else said it the way she did. The same rhythm, the same softness, the same warmth woven into the words even when she was annoyed. Hearing it again after years of silence hit me harder than any physical blow could have. I felt something inside me break open, a mix of hope and dread flooding in all at once, because if the voice truly belonged to her, then everything I believed about her disappearance had been wrong. Before I could call out her name, the doorknob shifted with a slow metallic click, and the heavy door began to creak open inch by inch, revealing a darkness inside that made my heart pound so loudly it drowned out every other sound. The door slowly opened. When the door finally eased open and a sliver of warm, golden light spilled into the cold night, I felt the entire world shrink into that narrow crack, as though everything I had lived through, every sleepless night, every unanswered question, every moment I had spent trying to convince myself to stop hoping, was suddenly gathering on the other side of that door. I didn't breathe. I don't think I even blinked. I just stood there, frozen, as the gap widened inch by inch, my heart pounding so violently it felt like it might tear straight through my chest. And then I saw her. She stepped into view slowly, cautiously, almost as if she expected someone else to be standing where I was. And for a second I thought the dim lighting must be playing tricks on me, because the mind can be cruel when it wants something badly enough. But the moment her face entered the light, the moment her eyes lifted and met mine, every illusion I had ever imagined evaporated. It was her. Not a resemblance, not a shadow, not a stranger with familiar features. No. She was standing right there, breathing the same air as me, wearing the same expression she had worn countless times before, an expression so deeply etched in my memory that seeing it again felt like having the past reach out and strike me across the face. My wife. The woman I had buried in my heart like a wound that refused to heal. The woman whose absence had hollowed out every part of my life. The woman I had mourned, cursed, missed, prayed for, and finally learned to live without, because I had no other choice. She was right there, alive. For a moment, sound dropped away. The cold air, the dim porch light, the massive mansion, none of it mattered. My vision blurred with tears I didn't even feel forming. It was as if the world folded in around her, narrowing until all I could see was the face of the person I thought I had lost forever. I felt my knees weaken. My hands trembled so violently the pizza carrier almost slipped from my grasp. A lifetime of emotions crashed through me at once. Shock so sharp it numbed me, disbelief so heavy it stole my breath, anger that she had been gone, heartbreak that she had let me break alone, and something even more painful than all the rest, the raw, aching relief of realizing she was alive. My God! The words barely escaped me. It's you. Her reaction was instantaneous, and it hit me harder than any emotional blow ever had. The moment she recognized me, and she did, I saw it clearly. Her eyes widened, not with joy, not with the relief I desperately needed her to feel, but with fear. Pure, trembling fear. Her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the door. She didn't step forward, didn't reach out, didn't smile or cry or even whisper my name. Instead, she stared at me with an expression that cut through me like a knife. The kind of expression someone wears when they see something that shouldn't exist, something impossible, something dangerous. She recognized me, I was certain of it. But she was terrified. That look, God, that look! It broke something inside me that I didn't even know was still fragile. I took a small step toward her, unable to stop myself, overcome by the need to hold her, to touch her, to hear her voice again, to understand how she could be alive and here and hiding behind this door in a mansion that didn't belong to us, didn't belong to anyone we knew, didn't belong anywhere near the story of our lives. Where have you been? The words tumbled out before I could stop them, thick with emotion. Why did you leave? Why didn't you come home? I looked everywhere. I thought you were gone. I thought you were... She lifted a trembling hand, not to reach for me, but to warn me to stop, and the pain of that gesture nearly brought me to my knees. Her lips parted, and for a moment I expected her to finally break, to let the mask fall away, to tell me everything. Why she disappeared, who kept her here, why she never came back. But instead her gaze darted behind her, toward the dim hallway inside the mansion, and I saw something, or someone, move in the shadows. She flinched, shoulders tensing, eyes filling with the kind of fear that doesn't come from seeing a long-lost husband. It came from being watched. She took a breath that shuddered as though it hurt her, then turned back to me with a look so desperate, so pleading, I felt the air leave my lungs. Her eyes said everything her voice could not. She wanted to speak. She wanted to reach out. She wanted to break the invisible chains holding her back. But she didn't. Instead, she swallowed hard, blinked twice as if holding back tears, and forced her voice into a calmness that didn't belong to her. I don't know who you are. The words didn't just hurt. They destroyed me. They didn't just wound. They shattered everything inside me that had dared to hope. Because her eyes told the truth. Her voice told the lie. And I had no idea which one would save her, or which one would destroy us both. For a few seconds after she spoke those impossible words, my mind refused to process them, as if the air between us had thickened into something heavy and unrecognizable. I kept staring at her face, every line, every subtle expression, every memory etched into her features. And nothing about her appearance suggested she was confused or mistaken or suffering from some kind of amnesia. No, she knew exactly who I was. I could see it in the way her eyes darted over my face, lingering on the small scars she used to trace with her fingertips, in the way her breath hitched when I said her name, and in the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly, the same way they always had when she was scared of being caught in a lie. But despite all of that, she stood there forcing her expression into something blank, polite, cautious, a stranger's expression. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, voice steadier than before, but painfully brittle beneath the surface. "You must have the wrong house." My heart hammered against my ribs, not just from shock, but from the unbearable confusion that swirled inside me like a storm. Why was she lying? Why pretend not to know me? Why pretend we had never shared a life, a home, a child? Dreams we built together brick by fragile brick until everything collapsed the day she vanished. I took a slow step toward her, unable to keep the desperation from my voice. Stop, please. Don't do this. I know you. I know everything about you. I know the way you used to fall asleep with your hand on my chest. I know the smell of your hair after you washed it at night. I know the scar on your left shoulder from when you— Before I could finish, she gave the smallest, sharpest shake of her head I had ever seen, a silent plea so urgent that it instantly killed the rest of my sentence. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was panic. She wasn't denying me because she wanted to. She was denying me because she had to. Her lips parted just slightly, and in that moment her expression shifted from fear to something almost heartbreaking. A silent message I recognized instantly. Don't say another word. I felt my breath catch in my throat as everything inside me tightened. She wasn't lying because she didn't know me. She was lying because someone didn't want her to know me. My gaze drifted past her shoulder, scanning the dim hallway behind her. At first it looked empty, nothing but shadows stretching across polished floors. But then movement flickered near the far end. Small, quick, and unmistakably human. She stiffened instantly, her entire posture transforming in a heartbeat, shoulders pulled back, chin lifted slightly, eyes hardening just enough to shift her expression from fearful to controlled. Someone was watching her, watching us. I swallowed the rising panic and forced myself to speak more quietly. Tell me what's going on, I whispered. Who's in there? Who are you afraid of? Why are you here? Her hand tightened around the edge of the door, knuckles white, fingers shaking. She leaned in ever so slightly, barely enough for anyone behind her to notice, but enough for me to hear the softest breath escape her lips. A breath weighted with regret, fear, and 1,000 unsaid things. But still, she didn't speak. She didn't explain. She didn't break the script she was being forced to follow. Instead, she straightened her posture, took a small, controlled breath, and said in a voice rehearsed and steady, "Sir, if you don't leave right now, I'll have to call someone." Someone. Not the police, not security. Someone she feared. I stared at her, realizing with a sickening twist in my chest that whatever situation she was in, it wasn't new. The fear in her eyes didn't come from something that had just happened. It came from something she had lived with for a long time. Something she had learned to obey. I opened my mouth to say her name again, to plead with her, to ask where she had been all this time, but she shook her head again. Faster, more desperate, and for a moment her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. She glanced back over her shoulder, confirming that the shadow was gone for now, and in that tiny second where she allowed herself to be honest, her face collapsed into pure heartbreak. She wanted to speak. She wanted to run to me. She wanted to explain everything. But she couldn't. Not here. Not now. Not with someone watching. I felt something cold settle into my spine, a chilling certainty that the mansion wasn't just wealthy or private. It was dangerous. The silence, the emptiness, the way she behaved, the shadow behind her, it all fit together too perfectly, like a puzzle designed to hide the ugliest picture. I took a slow breath, lowering my voice until it barely carried. I'm not leaving you here. Not again. Her eyes widened, fear spiking so sharply that she reached out, as if instinctively, to stop me from stepping into the doorway. But before her hand touched me, before she could whisper the truth I knew she was dying to say, another presence slipped up beside the door, a figure I hadn't noticed. Small, quiet, moving like a ghost through the shadows. A maid. She appeared out of nowhere, dressed in black and white uniform, her head slightly bowed, her steps so light they barely made a sound on the marble floor. She approached the door with her gaze lowered, her posture submissive, But the moment she reached the threshold, she lifted her eyes to mine with a warning so sharp it felt like a blade against my skin. Without moving her lips, she whispered, voice barely audible, "Leave before someone sees you with her." And the tone, the urgency, the fear, it told me one thing clearly. If I stayed another second, something far worse than heartbreak was waiting on the other side of that door. The maid's whisper cut through the air like a blade, so quiet that anyone standing more than a foot away would have missed it entirely, yet sharp enough to make the hairs rise on the back of my neck. Her eyes weren't just fearful. They were pleading, desperate, filled with the kind of terror that doesn't come from imagination but from experience. She didn't look at my wife. She didn't look at the pizza boxes in my hands. Her gaze locked onto mine as if she needed me to understand how serious this moment truly was. How close I had come to stepping into something far more dangerous than I could comprehend. For a moment, I couldn't move. I could barely even breathe. My wife stood rigid beside the door, avoiding my eyes deliberately, her posture tense and unnatural, as if she had trained herself to appear calm when every instinct inside her screamed otherwise. I saw the way her shoulders tightened with the maid's whisper, the way her fingers curled slightly inward, the way her breath grew shallow. She wasn't just scared for herself. She was scared for me. The realization hit me with a weight that made my chest tighten. She wasn't pretending not to know me because she wanted to erase our past. She was pretending because someone inside that mansion expected her to, someone who watched her every movement, someone who held enough power over her that even one wrong glance could cost her something precious. I had never seen her look so small, so trapped, so painfully silent. My mind raced, trying to decipher the situation while forcing myself to keep a neutral expression, because now I understood what she had been silently begging for from the very start. Don't react. Don't push. Don't draw attention. The maid stepped between us with practiced subtlety, her movement smooth and professional, the kind that would appear normal to an untrained eye. But I saw the urgency in every step, the stiffness in her posture, the speed with which she attempted to close the door. I wasn't supposed to be standing here. I wasn't supposed to be talking to my wife. I wasn't even supposed to recognize her. Before she shut the door completely, my wife's eyes flicked toward me. Just once. A brief, tiny movement, but powerful enough to hold an entire lifetime of emotion. It was the look of a woman who wanted to scream but couldn't. A look that begged for understanding, forgiveness, patience. A look that warned me to leave for my own safety even though her heart wanted me to stay. I stepped back slowly, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. The mansion's vast front courtyard stretched around me like an expanse carved out of a nightmare. Beautiful but cold, grand but silent, watched but empty. It was too still, too controlled. That stillness now felt suffocating. That's when I noticed the cameras. 3 of them, discreetly positioned around the entrance, small enough to be missed by anyone not paying attention, but visible enough to those who looked carefully. 1 above the archway, 1 angled toward the driveway, 1 tucked near a stone column, all pointing toward the place I stood, all pointing toward the door where my wife stood pretending she didn't know me. A cold shock rippled down my spine. Someone inside this mansion didn't just want privacy. They wanted surveillance. They wanted control. They wanted to see everything, hear everything, track everything. My gaze drifted farther across the courtyard, and that's when I noticed them. 2 guards standing farther down the path, partially hidden by shadows. They weren't in uniform, but their posture, their stillness, their silence gave them away instantly. They watched with the detached focus of men who had been trained to look without being seen. My pulse hammered harder. Something was very wrong here, and I had stepped right into the middle of it. I forced myself to turn back toward the door, just before the maid closed it fully, and that's when something near the threshold caught my eye. a small object lying just inside the doorway, half hidden by the ornate rug. It didn't belong to the mansion. It didn't belong to the staff. It belonged to her. A bracelet. Silver. Thin. Dented on one side. The bracelet I had given her on our 5th anniversary. The one she wore almost every day until the morning she disappeared. Seeing it there was like taking a punch to the stomach. That bracelet wasn't something she would casually drop. It wasn't something she would leave behind willingly. Its presence was a message only I would recognize, a tiny piece of her past life dropped like a breadcrumb for me to find. The maid noticed my gaze and closed the door faster, cutting off my view and any chance of retrieving it. The lock clicked shut, final and cold, echoing through the night like a warning shot. I stood there for several seconds, heart pounding, mind buzzing with questions I couldn't untangle. Why was she here? Why couldn't she acknowledge me? Who was watching her? What kind of place was this mansion? And why did it need guards, cameras, and staff afraid to speak? As I turned to leave, still shaken, still reeling, the door suddenly opened just a crack, so quiet, so subtle that the guards wouldn't have noticed. A small hand slipped out, trembling, reaching toward the pizza carrier I held. Not to take the pizza, but to slip something inside it. A small folded piece of paper. Her hand disappeared an instant later. The door slammed shut, louder this time, as if she had been forced to close it quickly. I stared at the pizza box in my hands, my pulse thundering in my ears, because whatever she had hidden inside wasn't food-related. It was a message, a secret she wasn't allowed to say out loud. And whatever it said was the reason I knew. Leaving the mansion that night wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning. I didn't open the note right there in the mansion's driveway, even though my hands ached to tear the box apart and see what she had slipped inside. The guards stood too close, the cameras too alert, the air too still. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave before someone inside realized the door had opened a second time. So I forced myself into the car, started the engine with shaking fingers, and drove off as calmly as I could manage, though the entire time my heart hammered like I had stolen something from the place. And in a way, I had. Only when the mansion disappeared from my rear-view mirror and the road fell into darkness did I pull over on the shoulder, my breath catching as I reached for the pizza box. My hands trembled so violently I had to steady the box against my knee. I lifted the lid, and there it was, a small folded note, creased from the way she had crushed it in her palm, the paper softened by her touch. Her handwriting hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the letters, the way she still curved her S's, the way her lines slanted slightly downward near the edges. A habit she used to joke made her look like she was writing in a hurry, even when she wasn't. My chest tightened painfully. For years I had searched for something, anything, that could prove she was still alive, that she hadn't simply walked away from our life without reason. Now I held her handwriting in my hands, and the weight of it broke something open inside me. I unfolded the note and read, "Don't come back. Please. It's not safe for you. It's not safe for our son." My breath caught so sharply I had to grip the steering wheel to steady myself. The words felt like knives, sharp, trembling, terrified. But they were hers. Her voice echoed inside them, every line dripping with desperation. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I'm sorry for everything I've put you through. I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." My throat tightened as I read those lines again and again, the pain behind each word sinking deep beneath my skin. She hadn't left me by choice. She hadn't abandoned our family. Something had taken her. Something had kept her. They're watching. They always watch. You have to stay away. If they see you again, they won't just hurt me. They'll hurt him. Please protect him. Please forget me. Please don't come back." I slammed the note against my chest and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the wave of emotion threatening to break me. The car felt too small, the air too tight. Everything inside me tore in two. Grief on one side, fury on the other. She had been alive all this time. Alive, trapped, terrified, forced into silence. And I had spent years blaming myself for not being enough, not doing enough, not saving her in time. The note trembled in my hand as I read the last line. I love you. I always will. But please, run. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. I hadn't cried in years. Not since the night she disappeared. Not since I realized no one cared enough to help me look for her. Not since I stood alone in our empty apartment, trying to explain to a child why his mother wasn't coming home. But now, sitting on the side of a deserted road with her handwriting pressed against my chest, my composure cracked completely. The note didn't just break my heart. It shattered the numbness I had built around it. Every grief I had buried, every unanswered question, every lonely night came rushing back in one suffocating wave. She hadn't left willingly. She hadn't chosen a new life. She hadn't abandoned us. She had been taken. And she was still in danger. Fear twisted in my gut, but right beneath it, something else began to burn. A slow, steady fire, fueled by everything she had endured and everything I had lost. I should have listened to her warning. I should have walked away. I should have protected our son by disappearing from this nightmare. But I couldn't. Not after seeing her face. Not after hearing her voice. Not after reading a note written with shaking hands, begging me to run because she couldn't. I wiped my eyes, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into my pocket like a piece of my soul I needed to keep close. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, determination tightening every muscle in my body. I didn't care what she said. I didn't care who watched her. I didn't care how dangerous that mansion was. I wasn't losing her again. But as I neared town, headlights appeared behind me. Too bright, too close, too deliberate. The car matched my speed, turned when I turned, slowed when I slowed. My stomach dropped. It was the same dark sedan from the mansion's driveway. And it was following me home. I drove home with one hand gripping the wheel and the other pressed against the pocket where her note rested, as if keeping it close to my body could somehow protect her. The dark car behind me didn't back off for a single second. Every time I changed lanes, it changed lanes. Every time I turned, it turned. The road stretched out ahead of me like a tunnel, and with every mile, the fear coiled tighter inside my chest, turning my breath shallow. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, hoping, praying that maybe I was wrong, that maybe the headlights belonged to some stranger who just happened to be going the same way. But the longer it followed, the more I knew I wasn't imagining anything. They were watching. They were making sure I understood exactly how close they were willing to get. By the time I pulled into the narrow parking lot behind my apartment building, my pulse throbbed inside my ears. I didn't turn off the engine. I didn't step out. I just sat there in the dark car, staring into the rearview mirror, my breath fogging the windshield as the sedan rolled to a slow stop at the far end of the lot. It didn't park. It just sat there with its headlights off, barely visible in the shadows. The silence in the night deepened until even the air felt afraid to move. My first thought wasn't about myself. It was about my son. I killed the engine and slipped quietly out of the car, every sense sharpened by adrenaline. I didn't run, though every instinct screamed at me to hurry. Instead, I forced my pace to remain steady, controlled, casual, as if I didn't notice the eyes on me from the far end of the parking lot, as if I wasn't counting every step toward my apartment door. When I reached it, I unlocked it with hands that trembled harder than I wanted to admit. Inside, the apartment was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway nightlight. My son slept curled on the couch, his small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, unaware of the nightmare standing just outside our building. I closed the door softly and locked it, sliding the bolt into place. Then I turned off every light, moved to the window, and pulled the blinds apart just enough to look outside. The sedan was still there. A man stood next to it now. Tall. Still. Motionless. His silhouette barely illuminated by the weak parking lot lights. He didn't lean against the car. He didn't look at a phone. He didn't pace or shift or pretend to be doing anything else. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, posture perfectly straight, as if he had all the time in the world and no fear of being seen. His presence wasn't rushed or panicked. It wasn't sloppy or careless. It was calculated, like a message sent in human form. I shut the blinds again, heartbeat hammering against my ribs. Every sound in the apartment suddenly felt too loud. The refrigerator humming, the pipes creaking, my son's soft breathing. I moved quickly and quietly, checking the back window, the side curtains, every lock. The man didn't move. The car didn't move. It was a standoff, silent, heavy, suffocating. I crouched beside the couch, brushing a hand gently over my son's hair. He shifted slightly but didn't wake. For a moment, watching him sleep, innocence still untouched by the darkness creeping into our lives, something inside me cracked wide open. My wife's warning echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. It's not safe for him. It's not safe for you. Run. I wanted to run more than anything. I wanted to lift my son into my arms, grab a bag, and disappear before the sun rose. But running meant leaving her behind again. Running meant accepting that she was trapped in that mansion with men who moved silently in the night and watched from the shadows. Running meant abandoning her to whatever life she had been forced into. And I couldn't do that. Not after seeing her eyes, not after reading her note, not after hearing her voice tremble with warnings she couldn't say out loud. Still crouched by the couch, I took my phone from my pocket and pulled up the screen, needing answers, needing some way to fight back. My thumb hovered over her number, the number I had kept all these years even though it had been disconnected. But before I could tap anything, the screen lit up by itself. A new message. Unknown number. For a second, I just stared, unable to breathe, my fingers frozen. I tapped the notification. The message contained only 3 words. Stop looking for her. For a long time after the text message, I sat on the floor beside my sleeping son, staring at the glowing screen as if it held the answers to everything swallowing my life. The message replayed in my mind like a threat carved into bone. Whoever sent it wasn't warning me. They were claiming ownership. They were letting me know that my wife, my life, my family had fallen under someone else's shadow long before I ever realized it. And the worst part was how confidently they said it. As if they were accustomed to giving orders, as if I was just another problem they expected to control. When the sedan finally drove away, minutes before sunrise, I didn't feel relief. I felt the weight of what I didn't know. There were too many gaps, too many missing pieces in the story of my wife's disappearance, pieces I had been too broken, or maybe too afraid, to search for at the time. But now I had no choice. When my son left for school that morning, still sleepy and unaware of the nightmare unfolding around us, I walked into the small storage room where I kept everything I couldn't bear to look at. Boxes stacked like silent tombstones filled the room. Boxes of things that belonged to her. I had shoved them there in the early months after she disappeared, unable to face the memories, the scents, the echoes of a life that had shattered overnight. But now, standing in the dim room, I felt a cold determination push aside the grief. I pulled the first box down and set it on the floor. It was filled with everyday things. Her old sweaters, her favorite scarf, a worn notebook full of recipes she wanted to try. I ran my fingers across the fabric, the paper, the scent of her faint but still present. These weren't just objects. They were fragments of a life I thought I understood, a woman I believed I knew. The second box was heavier. I opened it slowly. Inside were documents, neatly stacked, tucked into folders, organized in ways I never realized she preferred. Medical papers, work contracts, tax forms. But as I sifted through them, the normalcy dissolved. I found papers written in languages she had never mentioned knowing, documents stamped with symbols I didn't recognize, a business card for a law firm in another state, a certificate from a training program she never told me she attended. Confusion crept into my chest like cold water. Why had she hidden these? Why hadn't she told me? I dug deeper. Then I found the photographs. At first glance, they didn't seem suspicious. My wife standing beside people I didn't know, smiling politely, holding a clipboard, attending some kind of event. But the more I looked, the more details unsettled me. Every person in the photos looked serious, wealthy, powerful. Men in expensive suits, women dressed sharply. None of them were friends she had ever mentioned. None of them matched any part of her life with me. And in every photo she stood slightly apart, like someone who didn't belong but had been forced to. The last photo made my stomach drop. She stood beside a man I recognized, not from my life before, but from last night. The silhouette in the mansion hallway. Even in the photograph, he radiated a presence that felt cold and unsettling. He stood too close to her. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, and though the gesture might have seemed friendly, the look in her eyes, barely concealed tension, told the real story. I sat back, overwhelmed, the photo trembling between my fingers. She had a life before me, before us, that I knew nothing about. Not a simple life with forgotten hobbies or old friends, but something deeper, darker, threaded with people she once knew or worked for, people connected to wealth and influence and danger. She had kept those secrets to protect me, to protect our family. But those secrets had come back, stronger and more violent, and taken her away. My heart throbbed painfully. The woman I loved, the mother of my child, had lived 2 lives, and I had only ever been allowed to see one of them. Why? Who forced her to hide it? And why were they watching me now? As the question swirled violently inside me, my phone buzzed. The sound sliced through the silence, and I jumped, adrenaline bursting through my veins. I grabbed the phone, half expecting another threat, but it wasn't a number I recognized. No name, no message preview. My finger hovered over the screen before I finally opened it. One message, 5 words. We need to talk. Tonight. I stared at the text, pulse quickening. It wasn't the tone of a threat. It was the tone of someone afraid, someone who couldn't speak openly, someone who knew more than I did. More messages followed, sent quickly, like the sender didn't have much time. Behind the old diner. 11 p.m., alone. Do not tell anyone. Before I could respond, another message appeared. Please, it's about her. My breath caught. There was only one person this could be. Only one person who had been close enough to signal warnings inside the mansion. Only one person who had watched my wife with fear and pity. The maid. And she was risking everything to meet me. The night felt unnaturally still as I approached the old diner, its cracked neon sign buzzing faintly above the empty parking lot. The place had been abandoned for years, a forgotten corner of town where no one bothered to look anymore, which made it the perfect place for a secret meeting, and the worst place to trust a stranger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the same dark sedan to appear out of nowhere, its headlights cutting through the silence. But nothing moved. No cars, no people, nothing but the faint hum of electricity and the cool night wind. I reached the back of the diner and waited. My nerves twisted so tight they felt like wire beneath my skin. Every sound, distant cars on the highway, leaves rustling in the trees, made me flinch. I didn't know what to expect, only that the message had come from someone who knew my wife, someone who understood the danger we were both in. A faint shuffle of footsteps broke through the silence. I turned sharply. The maid slipped out from the shadows, her uniform hidden beneath a long, dark coat, her hair pulled back tightly as though even loose strands could betray her. She kept her head low, her hands tucked into her sleeves, her movements quick and cautious, like someone who had practiced fear long enough for it to become second nature. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know if you would. I had to." My voice sounded raw, even to my own ears. "I need to know what's happening to her, and why." She took a shaky breath, scanning the empty lot before stepping closer. "Everything I tell you tonight puts both of us in danger. If they find out I talked to you, I won't survive it." The words chilled me. "Then why risk it?" "Because she saved me once," she whispered, "and now she has no one left to save her." The dread I had been carrying since the mansion tightened around my ribs. "Tell me the truth. All of it." The maid hesitated, then nodded. "Your wife didn't leave." She didn't run. She didn't choose any of this. She was taken." I felt my breath stop. Taken. The word hung between us like a blade. "She used to work with people connected to the mansion's owner, years ago, before she met you, before she built a life with you. She walked away from that world when she realized what kind of man he truly was. But men like him don't let people go." "Not completely." My stomach twisted as her passed. Those unfamiliar documents, the photographs, the faces, began to click painfully into place. "He found her," the maid continued softly. "He tracked her down after she disappeared from that world, and he wanted her back. Not as an employee, not as a partner, as something he believed he owned." I clenched my fists, fury rising so violently I had to force myself to remain still. "She never told me any of this." "She wanted to," the maid said, "but she wanted to protect you. And your son. When he took her, the first thing he threatened was the child." My vision blurred for a moment, rage and fear colliding so hard I could barely breathe. My wife had stayed silent all these years, not because she wanted to leave, but because she believed speaking up would put our son in danger. "He forced her to pretend she didn't know you," the maid said. "He forbade her from mentioning your name. He controlled her every move, every word, every look. And the more she resisted, the worse things became." A sickening weight settled in my stomach. She looked terrified. "She is," the maid whispered. "She tried to escape once, 2 years ago. She made it all the way to the gate before they caught her. I was the one who found her. She begged me to let her go. I couldn't. I was being watched, too." My hands shook at my sides. "What did he do to her?" The maid closed her eyes, pain tightening her features. "Enough to make her believe she'll never get another chance. Enough to make her think the next punishment won't be hers, but your son's." I felt something inside me crack open, deeper than anything I had felt the night she disappeared. Every moment of her silence, every tear she had hidden behind her eyes, every warning in her note. It all made sense now. She hadn't been protecting herself. She had been protecting us. The maid stepped closer, her voice barely above a breath. "She still loves you. She never stopped. That note she wrote, she risked everything to slip it into your box. If he had seen it—" Her words faltered. "He would have taken her to the room." My pulse stuttered. "What room?" Her eyes widened slightly, her fear suddenly sharper. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, cold metal key. She pressed it into my palm, her hand trembling as she did. "This opens the room she fears most," she whispered. "The room he keeps locked. The room he never lets anyone enter." I stared at the key, its weight far heavier than metal. "What's inside?" I asked. The maid shook her head. "I don't know," she does. "And whatever it is, it's the reason he will never let her go." Before I could ask another question, she backed away into the shadows. "If you want to save her," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you'll have to go there yourself." And then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness, leaving me alone with the truth and the key to a room that held the secrets my wife had been terrified of for years. I waited for hours in the dark, clutching the key the maid had given me, turning it over and over in my hand, as if the metal itself could speak. Midnight crept closer, the sky twisting into a heavy blanket of clouds that threatened rain, and every passing minute sharpened the tension in my chest. I kept replaying her words, the fear in her voice, the desperation behind her warning. My wife hadn't left me. She hadn't chosen this life. She had been dragged back into a world she'd once escaped, a world ruled by a man who believed he owned her. The thought made my skin crawl. At exactly 12:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. "I need to see you. Same place as before. Alone." No name, no details. But I didn't need either. It was her. The rain began just as I stepped out of my car, soft at first, then steadily drumming against the pavement. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and hurried toward the old pedestrian bridge near the river, the one place I knew she meant. It was hidden enough to avoid cameras, distant enough that no guards would follow without being noticed. When I reached the bridge, the world felt suspended in the storm. Water rushed beneath the wooden planks, the wind carrying the scent of rain and earth, and the darkness wrapped around everything like a cold embrace. Then she stepped out from behind one of the pillars. For a moment, we just stared at each other through the falling rain, both of us breathless, both frozen by the weight of everything we couldn't say. She looked thinner, paler, shadows beneath her eyes so deep they seemed carved into her skin. But she was still her, still the woman I loved, still the mother of our child, still the missing heartbeat in my life. I walked toward her slowly, terrified that if I moved too fast she might vanish again, like she had 3 years ago. When I reached her, she hesitated, as if touching me might break the fragile barrier keeping her safe, then finally closed the distance and wrapped her arms around me. The moment she touched me, everything inside me cracked. I held her tightly, burying my face in her hair, feeling her body tremble against mine, the rain soaking both of us. She clung to me as if afraid I might disappear, her breath shaking, her fingers digging into my back. It wasn't a soft reunion. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, raw, full of the pain of years stolen from us. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into my shoulder, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to disappear." I pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Then why? Why did you go? Who took you? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" She swallowed hard, glancing nervously around us before speaking. "He found me. The man I used to work for. The man I ran from. He tracked me down, threatened me, threatened our son. I tried to tell you, I tried to explain, but—" Her voice cracked. "I couldn't risk him hearing a single word." Her hands trembled as she touched my face. "You weren't supposed to find me." "But I did. And now he knows you're looking," she whispered, fear widening her eyes. "You have to stop. He won't let me go. He won't let us go." Anger and heartbreak twisted inside me. "Did he hurt you?" She hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. Her silence answered the question. "We can't keep living like this," I said. "You and me, our son. We're not safe as long as he has this kind of control over you." "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's why we have to leave. Tonight. But it won't be easy. He has guards everywhere, cameras, people who report every movement. If we make one mistake, he'll destroy everything." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. "The maid gave me this, said it opens the room you fear most." Her face drained of color. She staggered back, one hand gripping the railing, the rain pouring off her hair. No, you can't go there. You don't understand. That room—" She swallowed hard. "If he finds you near it, he'll kill you." "What's inside?" I asked. She shook her head violently. "Not here, not now. We have to be careful. He could have people anywhere, watching us, listening." I stepped closer. "Then tell me how we escape. Tell me what we need to do." For the first time since she appeared, a spark of hope flickered in her eyes. There's a way, a hidden path through the basement that leads outside the property. The guards don't know about it. Only the maid and I do. If we time it right, if we're quiet, if we're fast." Her voice cut off abruptly. Her posture shifted. Her eyes snapped past me, widening in horror. I turned sharply, rain blurring my vision. Footsteps, slow, heavy, unmistakable. Someone was approaching us through the darkness. I didn't sleep after the night on the bridge. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the footsteps approaching us through the rain, and the terror in her voice when she begged me to leave before we were found. I had barely escaped, slipping behind the trees and running until my lungs burned, but the fear in her eyes stayed with me long after the danger passed. That fear wasn't for herself. It was for me, for our son, for the fragile thread of hope she was risking everything to protect. By dawn, I made my decision. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't going to let some man, some monster, decide the fate of my family. The truth was simple. If I didn't go into that mansion tonight, if I didn't find the room she feared most, if I didn't uncover what he was using to keep her prisoner, then she would never be free. None of us would. Fear sat heavy in my chest, pulsing with every breath, but it didn't weaken me this time. It strengthened me. Fear meant I had something worth fighting for. I left my son with the only neighbor I trusted, telling her it was an emergency shift I couldn't avoid. I forced myself not to look back as I walked to my car, because if I did, if I saw his small face or heard his voice, my courage might crack, and I needed all of it to survive what I was about to do. The mansion's gates loomed in the moonlight, their iron bars casting long shadows across the driveway. I parked far down the hill, hidden among the trees, and made my way up the gravel path on foot. Each step felt like I was walking into a storm I couldn't turn back from. The air was cold, the night unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, just the low hum of distant electricity and the relentless pounding of my own heartbeat. The maid's key felt ice cold in my hand, the key to the room she feared, the room that held the truth. I moved toward the side entrance, the one the maid told me the guards rarely checked. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock, not from cold, but from the crushing weight of what opening this door meant. If I was caught, I wouldn't walk out of here alive. And worse, neither would she. The lock clicked softly, almost gently, as if inviting me in. I slipped inside. The mansion was darker than I remembered. Not silent, houses this large never are, but filled with a thick, heavy stillness that made the back of my neck prickle. Somewhere deep inside, machinery hummed. A light flickered at the far end of the hall. I stayed low, moving quietly over the polished floor, each step echoing faintly despite my attempts to stay silent. Fear crawled up my spine. Courage pushed it down. I ducked behind a tall, decorative column as two guards passed, one speaking into a radio, the other scanning the hallway with practiced vigilance. I held my breath, counting their steps, waiting until their voices faded before emerging again. The maid's directions played through my mind like a map. Left past the portrait. Down the narrow service hallway. Second door. Locked from the outside. Only the key she gave me could open it. The deeper I moved, the more suffocating the air became. The mansion's walls felt too close, too knowing, too full of secrets. Every shadow looked capable of reaching out and grabbing me. Every sound, distant footsteps, shifting floorboards, the faint click of cameras, made my pulse spike. Yet I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every second wasted was another second she remained trapped in this gilded prison. I reached the long, dim corridor the maid described. A series of identical doors lined the walls, each perfectly carved, each painted the same rich shade of ivory, each one hiding something I wasn't meant to see. But only one door mattered, the one at the very end. The forbidden door. I approached slowly, breath tightening in my chest. The air near it felt colder, heavier, as if whatever lay behind it bled its presence through the wood. The key trembled in my hand. My fingers were numb. My heart beat so hard I felt it in my throat. I ran my hand over the doorknob. It was warm. Someone had been here recently. I swallowed hard and bent down, pressing my ear against the smooth surface of the door. At first, there was nothing. Just the distant hum of electricity and the soft, rhythmic thudding of my heartbeat against the wood. Then something shifted. A sound. Faint. Muffled. Human. I held my breath, pressing harder. Another sound, a voice, breaking, calling, and then a scream. Her scream! High, raw, filled with terror and agony and desperation, tearing through the door and ripping down my spine like fire. I stumbled back, heart racing, blood turning to ice. She was inside. She was in pain. And something was happening to her right now. I grabbed the key with trembling fingers, shoved it into the lock, and twisted. And at that exact moment, another sound emerged behind me. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Someone was in the hallway, and they were coming straight toward me. The footsteps behind me grew louder. Slow, deliberate, echoing down the corridor like a countdown I wasn't ready to face. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to abandon the door and disappear before the footsteps reached me. But her scream still vibrated through my bones, raw and agonizing, the kind of sound that didn't just break a person, it destroyed them. And in that moment, fear no longer mattered. Survival no longer mattered. Only she did. My fingers tightened around the key, and with a trembling breath, I jammed it into the lock. The metal turned with a soft click. The sound almost gentle despite the storm raging inside me. My heart pounded so violently I had to press my shoulder against the door to steady myself. The footsteps were close now. So close I could hear the faint rasp of someone's breath. But I pushed the door open anyway, forcing myself into the room before hesitation could slow me down. The room was dark, but not the natural kind of darkness. This was engineered, heavy, controlled, intentional. A single overhead light flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows that crawled across the walls like living things. The air was thick, metallic, almost suffocating. It felt less like a room and more like a cage. And in the center of that cage, my wife. She was strapped to a chair, wrists bound, hair tangled, tears streaking down her face. But what struck me wasn't the restraints or the fear in her eyes. It was the look she gave me when the light flickered enough for her to see my face. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't even relief. It was terror. She shook her head violently, struggling against the restraints, trying desperately to warn me. "No," she mouthed, voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't—" But I rushed to her anyway, dropping to my knees and fumbling with the knots around her wrists. "I'm here now," I said, my voice cracking, my hands shaking. "I'm getting you out. I'm not leaving you again." She pulled against me desperately, not to escape the restraints, but to get me away. "Listen to me," she gasped, eyes wide. "You don't understand. He didn't just take me. He didn't just want control of my life. He—" Her breath hitched as something behind me creaked. My body froze. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see, and the room around me came into horrifying focus. Not just one chair, not just one set of restraints, multiple, lined against the walls, old, rusted metal frames, dried stains that told stories I didn't want to hear, photographs pinned to a board, files stacked neatly on a table, each labeled with names of people I didn't know, names crossed out in red ink. Except one, my wife's name, not crossed out, underlined. The truth hit me like a blow to the chest. This wasn't a punishment room, this wasn't a prison, this was where he broke people, this was where he tried to break her. The footsteps behind us stopped in the doorway. A silhouette filled the frame, tall, still, coldly composed. The mansion owner. The man from the photographs. The shadow who had haunted every corner of her life. He hadn't needed guards to come here. He came himself, confident that no one who entered this room ever walked out unchanged. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly, his voice almost calm, almost conversational, like he wasn't standing in the middle of a nightmare of his own making. "But I suppose love makes people foolish." The temperature in the room seemed to drop as he stepped closer, each footfall measured, cruelly patient. My wife's breathing sped up, her fear turning frantic. "Please," she begged him, her voice breaking. "He didn't know. He wasn't part of this. Let him go. I'll do whatever you want. Just let him go." The man's gaze slid to her, then to me, his expression unreadable. "You should have stayed away," he repeated softly. "But now that you're here—" He paused, tilting his head slightly, examining me like someone studying an insect pinned beneath glass. "You'll finally understand why she could never leave." A cold sweat broke across my skin. My pulse hammered so violently I thought I might faint. But before I could speak, before I could move, before I could even reach for her again, the man stepped back, and the door behind me slammed shut with a violent crack. The sound echoed like thunder. Total darkness swallowed the room for a split second, and then a whisper brushed the back of my neck, low and chilling, spoken by a voice far too close. "Welcome." The world tilted. My breath caught, and I knew. This nightmare was only beginning. If this story pulled you in, don't leave now. Your next mystery is already waiting. Make sure to subscribe and keep the notifications on so you never miss what happens next.